Coming to you straight from the Rio Grande and beyond. Broadcasting to the four corners of the globe. So grab your seat, your coffee, or your sundowner.
Okay, everybody, here we go.
On point, as always. This is Gloves Off. Gloves Off.
So when I was working on Selena, the series for Netflix, to play the role of Abraham Quintanilla, I put on a specific amount of weight, which I was fine doing, but also realizing it could be difficult to get that weight off. I got back into my physical regimen with James Leha, but I was still having trouble with just those last amounts. And that's when I got to meet Arturo from Laredo Medical Weight Loss Clinic. And just the products that he gave me kind of put me over the edge. I feel great about myself.
Hi, I'm Don McLaughlin. I'm a candidate for House District 80, which consists of Webb County, Uvalde County, Dimmitt County, Zavala County, Frio County, and Atascosa County. I'm also a small businessman, and I know what it takes to run a small business. And for too long, we've had too much government regulation coming into our small business and making it tougher and tougher for us to survive and get by. And that's one of the things I hope to change. Small business is the backbone of the state of Texas, and we need to make sure it thrives and that they have the support they need in government and less government regulation.
Back at you and Gloves Off. I'm Paul Buitron. I'm here with a person I call a dear friend and a brother of mine, a CLAP practitioner, Guru Joe Judt. And we're going to be touching base on just self-defense and what attracts people to it, why people train, and so on and so forth. How you doing, my brother? You doing good?
Doing fantastic, Paul. It's great to see you.
Good. It's good to see you. And how's everything in your end of the world?
You know, I can't complain. You know, it's still spinning at an incredibly fast speed through space, and I'm clinging on.
You know, I woke up this morning and I'm always messing around with social media, and TikTok came up that they just had an armada of spaceships heading to Earth. And I said, oh, shit, that's all we need.
They're probably just coming to find obscure records, right? Yeah.
They're looking for emails. But but how's the CLAP and how's your students out there? How are they doing? They're doing good?
You know, things have started to ramp up again since post-COVID, right? You know, prior to COVID, I probably had one of the largest practice groups,
right,
in the world of this particular stuff. And, COVID kind of pulled that down a bit, but my core team stayed with me the whole time, and everyone's been training incredibly hard. And now it's just a matter of getting people, getting one rocking and rolling. But the overall quality has increased of the students dramatically because, the student body became quite a bit smaller. And I'll be honest with you, that doesn't really bother me that much because I'm very much like the quality, right?
Absolutely. And that's usually what it is. You want quality, not quantity. The same thing in Savant. The pandemic shot us down and we started growing. And all of a sudden this year we've had a lot of people pass away. My father passed away and several other friends passed away. A lot of people are ending up with severe illnesses that were, and some of the old timers, so a lot of stuff has just dissipated. And we've gotten a new crew coming in. They're sticking together with it. And I tell them it's a consistency. When there's 10, more will follow, and if you train, I tell the guys, if you train once a month and you come back next month and you say you're not learning anything, well, you're only training once a month. You have to have a consistent plan. And not only that, you have to train at home as well. So a lot of people do not understand that. They think that they can come into a school, throw on a t-shirt of the school or the uniform of the style, regardless of the style, work out, and that's it. No, you have to continue with it. Sometimes at home you can do what the jurus, your forms, or what have you, do a little shadow boxing, stuff like that every other day. Keep it going. If you really want to learn.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I think that when we were coming up, you had to sacrifice your left arm. I almost said something very inappropriate there. You had to sacrifice your left arm just to see something, much less have it explained to you or get any proper coaching out of it. And
Right.
now people can hop on the internet and there's all sorts of information out there. Some of it good, some of it amazing that it's out there, and some of it, yeah, really a lot of it not so good. But I think there's a sense that knowledge is free,
Right.
and that, because it's just right there, you don't actually have to work very hard to accomplish anything. That's something that I think is kind of comes with a change in the culture, this mass information society we live in. But reality hasn't changed, right? If you want to be able to stand up against a threat, you have to have the tools to do it. And that tool is you. If you don't build it, you don't have it.
Yeah, there's no magic fairy that's going to pop up with a wand right in front of a altercation and go bingo. It doesn't happen that way, and people might believe that fantasy, but it's not. It doesn't happen. You have to train with it. It takes time. Muscle memory is what I tell everybody. You have to have muscle memory. And sometimes some people say, well, I'm training 4 hours a day. Okay. But if you're training something that built a bad habit in you for 4 hours a day, you're training upon a bad habit. So they say, so I don't need a teacher because I can train this way. I can train at my house. Yeah, great. You can train at your house. But the watchful eye of an instructor can clear up a lot of those bad habits. And it depends on the instructor to instructor, and regardless of title. And once they clear up those bad habits, they're putting you on a better path. And you need that to begin with. And then there's a time that you're going to be training by yourselves. We all train by ourselves. We all continued, but I think you need that watchful eye. Like you said, there's a lot of information out there. Some good, some bad. I agree with you 100%. And a lot of people think, well, I can just pop on YouTube and look at this, and now I know this system, and I go over here, I can mix this with that, mix this with that. Some things don't mix. Water and vinegar don't mix. And oil, they don't. They just.
Amen to that, right? It's like I find it fascinating, Paul, because you started with Sabat, and Sabat has a built-in method for evaluating its skill, right? Sparring is inseparable from what I've seen, and that often provides a gut check in terms of how people are training and stuff when you have sparring as a component. But I find it interesting that people think they can walk into sparring without doing the work first, and it seems so common these days that it's startling. I've had people, before COVID, I had a bunch of people in my club here, and I had ones who kept insisting they'd be allowed to spar, and I was like, "You're not ready for it. You will get hurt. Please, especially the way we spar. I mean, just you're going to get hurt. Please wait until you're ready." And a couple of them would go off and insert themselves if I left the room for a minute, and the next thing you know, we're carting them out the door because at some point the work matters, right? And the effort that goes into it. And while sparring in itself isn't the end all be all of everything, because you have to have rules, so there's safety and people are not going to get hurt. You're not going to break your toys, right? But it is a real reality check. How do you deal with the unexpected? How do you deal with someone actually giving you pressure, right? How do you manage that? And how does this, I mean, from your experience, because you're a very seasoned, very experienced coach, how do you see this modern mentality, this unwillingness to show up? How does it impact the ability to actually teach people to use their art?
Would the question be of the people not showing up for them to be using the art?
Yeah, I mean, how does that translate when they then want to go try sparring? I mean, how does it extend out the learning cycle, right? If they're not getting the regular practice, not getting that coaching, it seems to me like the learning cycle just gets stretched out to a point where
what ends up happening is you're readjusting the person over and over. Like I said, I could talk about the habits. There's a lot of bad habits when you fight. There's a lot of bad habits from telegraphing. Either you have hands up, and some people throw a cross and they're doing this. Well, all of a sudden they might be doing this thing, wailing, or their hands on the ground, on low here. and they think this is a good guard, or they have their hands together in this fashion. I'm just giving some examples. And you want to try to correct them to better them. Now, if you correct them that day, then they leave and come back a month later to train, and they're still doing the same thing. It's because they're going back home and practicing or don't care about the tutelage. Now, when it comes to that point, it's, I'm not going to fight for you in the street. I'm sorry for you. But but you get the people that are building up like an attribute, because sparring for us and in the boxing realm is not because I put on the gloves and I go with you and we're exchanging. That wouldn't be sparring. Sparring is when I put on a helmet, when I put in shin guards, when I put in a little bigger groin protector, a little bit heavier gloves, and I'm training you because you're going to end up fighting in 6 weeks, or I'm going to end up fighting in 6 weeks. And the amount of power and intensity starts going up as we start building that fighter. Now, that mentality has been transferred over to local classes and what I've seen in social media with everybody posting. And they think that, okay, since I have shin guards, I have big gloves, and and I don't need a helmet, I can kick you as hard as I want. But when you're kicking as hard as you want, all of a sudden you're still building those bad habits. So when you take those off and somebody stops your foot in the street with a boot on, and all of a sudden you fall down to the ground because all of a sudden pain takes over, or they pop you in the face because you were throwing a softball, and those, how can I put it? Now I look at it as, I'm glad they're training that way. It's better for me and my guys. Understand?
I totally understand that.
When I look at it, I don't even try to correct. I went to a school the other day and I saw these guys doing. I didn't even. Well, how did? Okay, they're your students. I don't know if those guys are one day going to end up in a beer joint drinking beer, and one of my guys is going to be there. I'm not going to correct your guys. They're not mine.
Exactly.
Understand?
Totally.
Now, if I have an associate of mine, like I go to your school, or you come over here and you start correcting mine, you're helping aid mine because we're associates in that thing. Understand what I'm saying? In that kind of favor. But now I'm looking at it the way my professors were looking at it. Understand what I'm saying? So it's interesting how that pendulum is switching. Before I would correct them if they didn't want to. Now I'll correct those that come to me. I care for them. But again, it's that level of intensity, the level of correcting your students while you're teaching is very important. And yes, I go back to, yes, you can mimic a video on YouTube, but the energy and the corrections of habits comes from the watchful eye of an instructor in front of you.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things. To your point, I always get questioned by my students. They go like, why don't you try to convince this person of X or Y? And I don't want to, right? And like, I have a rule in my club, which is we don't have a presence on the internet, other than someone might post a video of some training or something, right, to drag people to their club. But we don't talk about anything because I don't want to educate people outside of my club, right? It's just the way it is. And there's things that I would put out there because it's more well known, right? Or showing it doesn't hurt because it's the same thing as everyone else is doing, right? That's halfway decent. But there's a lot of stuff, especially when you watch these influencers talking about self-defense. On the one hand, we all know that there are people out there teaching self-defense who absolutely shouldn't be. Right? They've never fought in the ring. They've never fought anyone for real. They've never had any experience, and are hypothesizing, working things out in the gym, which in and of itself is better than doing nothing at all. But they are going out and trying to educate people. Like there was a video, there was a guy, he tried to make some hay in the martial arts world. Now he's a political commentator on YouTube. And he did a video, he took a bunch of clips of different knife people, right? Showing their knife work and then talking about how it was bullshit, right? And then proceeded to show why he thought it was BS. And it demonstrated this guy knew absolutely nothing about working with a knife, which I wouldn't expect him to. He was an MMA guy, right? He's done a lot of grappling and good, right? That's good. But when that knife came out, he was going to die. And people are like, well, why didn't you respond to this? And I actually forward his advertisement to this one guy who's really well known. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a very public teacher. And I said, dude, he's got an old footage you included in this. If you want, I can make him stop, because I know my way around legal stuff. And he's like, yeah, I don't care. Because he just didn't care. He's like, guys, people are going to do what they want to do. He can think what he wants to think. And I think there's a certain amount of that. But more importantly, there are things that you're just never going to learn unless you find both the right teacher and get inside the door. No matter how much information's out on YouTube, it's still not all out there. And there's a whole generation of people that, like, our teachers are all passing away now, right? And we're getting a little long in the tooth ourselves. So it's the opportunity to engage and train has never been better. People have never been more open in the teaching than they are now. But actually meeting people who will train is a challenge. I mean, they're all going to MMA, right?
Yeah. And like, somebody asked me last week, and she goes, how long have you been doing Savant or Support de Savant? I go, well, I started at the age of 6 with my uncle, and I just turned 56 last Saturday. So that means 50 years I've been doing this, and I'm still learning. And I learn every day, especially from my students, because they always come up with a question. So you have to answer it, and you have to, teach it. And I'll talk a little bit about Savant. Savant's a little bit different because it's in both a style and a system at the same time. And I say that because of the pedagogy that it goes into it. It has a certain formula to build up, especially in the sport, in the arena of the sport. And you're building up individuals. And when you get to, let's say, 9 out of 10 individuals are going to be they'll be proficient as long as they continue with this pedagogy of the way it's moving. And that's what I've seen that in comparison to other arts, is sometimes these curriculums, they don't have a pedagogy. They just have a bunch of stuff that you have to be able to try to do. And it's not building you to, you want to get here, and it's not building you here. It's kind of taking you here and go back up here and back down here. And eventually one guy is going to just kind of jump and all of a sudden end there, And that's what I see with a lot of these curriculums that are out there. And I'll take a curriculum that's more towards our eyes that we've all seen. That's American Kempo. I think American Kempo, the way Grandmaster Parker built it, and the guys over there, his first generation that helped them put it together, I think it's a system that is stand on its own. It stood on its own for the last 50 plus years, And it's a very strong system. But a lot of people don't want that because of this fad that's going out there. And I'll say it's MMA. MMA is good.
Yeah.
For the sport. But don't try to do that in the street. Not here in Laredo. They'll take you to the ground and they'll shoe shine you. And you're going to end up in the hospital if you're lucky. If not, you're going to end up in a little casket. And a lot of people do not understand that in the street, number one, there's no rules. And it's street fights on the FBI stats, don't last more than 9 seconds. And if they last more than that, somebody else is jumping in, and there's a lot of people going to the ground. Okay? Yeah. So there's a lot of people who do not understand the reality of what is in the street. And when you train in a system, and I'm not knocking them down, that does point karate, and they say, okay, this is going to fight, you're going to do good with a person a boxer that's skilled, or a Thai boxer, an MMA person that's training for a bout in the ring. Totally two different levels.
Yeah, no, it's different. Everything's different. I mean, so one of my early teachers was a guy named Manuel Rodriguez, and he trained with this guy Sammy Wong in Chicago, and his other teacher, Uncle Jack Moy, I ended up training with when Manny left Chicago. And he used to, I met him by accident, but he happened to be doing something I was very interested in, and we both had judo in our background, right? And so he actually took me in to be both to train with him, but also to be his training partner in Shuai Jiao, Chinese wrestling.
That's a beautiful art.
It's great. And the the thing about Manny is for a period of time there in my trunk in my early, like late teens or whatever it was, I had a uniform for judo, a uniform for karate, a uniform for taekwondo, boxing shorts and boxing gear, a kickboxing setup, all that stuff, because I didn't know where I was going that weekend to fight, under what rules. And sometimes it'd be rules that we just weren't, I didn't have anything for, right? And other times we'd be trying to just adapt what we did. And there's something to say for that. I mean, different rule sets give you certain amounts of things, but also being outside of your element, right? And doing stuff. And we carry that idea through today. I mean, most of my clubs routinely now, thanks to MMA, we have smokers we can go to, or we have open mat nights we can go visit. And since we're well and we'll play hard, we always are well respected and well liked at these clubs we visit, and we perform well. And they always go, "Oh, you guys are traditionalists, but you do this well." And I'm like, "Well, it's because we actually train, right? You train to do this." I mean, to me, it just like you mentioned American Kempo. I've never done American Kempo, but I've studied it from afar, right? Because I was fascinated by the history and the structure of how it was put together, right? And I've known a number of high level American Kempo guys. I've taught at a couple of those gyms at like mixed teaching events, right? And always great practitioners, but there is a logic behind the foundation. And that logic is, it's very systematic, definitely a product of its time, but it covers all the fundamentals from defensive tactics to offensive tactics, and you name it, and it just makes sense. And actually studying that actually impacted how I myself teach, because I sat down and looked at this going, just exactly what you said, I go, I've got all this different stuff. A couple of arts I learned had a very direct path. You start here, you end up here if you do these things, right? Other things, we have at least one art in common where it had a systematic process, but a lot of the biggest lessons were kind of buried in, all the stuff, right? All the sambuts and all the things, right? And training it to use it, I think, in fact, I know this is true of you because I watched you at events back in the day, right? And it's definitely true of myself. My background in combat sports helped me unpack, the pieces, right? And it's like we're not the enemy of combat sports when you're talking about self-defense, right? Yeah. Combat sport helps make you good, right? Makes you competent. But like everything, when you set up rules and guidelines, those rules and guidelines impact what you're aware of. And there are things that will mess you up. Like take, for example, and this goes against my rule of not teaching on the internet, right? But in boxing, which is Western boxing is a wonderful thing. They teach that you go in, you throw your combination, you come back, and you frame yourself, right? Okay. So that's fine in the context of using your two weapons, your hands, right, in a ring. The minute I introduce a weapon into that, going in, punching, stepping back, and framing is an exercise in getting punctured. Just is, right? And that's just one example of things where what is trained for sport and becomes really excellent for sport or really excellent for sparring can suddenly be flipped on its head and be a liability, right? And that's where I think finding people who have arts and practices that cross that bridge on both sides, right? You see this a lot more MMA. Like we're friends with a lot of MMA gyms because that's where we go to fight people, right? And right. A lot of these guys who are really, really good MMA coaches, they're crossing that bridge too. They're just coming from the other side. They're like, oh, there's this gap here. Well, now we have to do this. But for the students, they don't know, right? And unfortunately, with the popularity, it's just like everything else. As soon as it gets popular, the standard starts to fall, right? And the standard of the people teaching, the professors, if you will, right? They're out there sharing what they've learned or what they saw on video this week, or stuff framed around the competition, but it's not in the context of that broader world, right? And if you look at American Kempo, it evolved at a time when they actually there were several branches. There was There was, the BKF group, right? There was a Polynesian group called Lima Llama. And these guys all knew each other, all cross-trained, all came from William Chow ultimately, or Ed Parker. But because of the racial tensions of the 60s, they kind of had their groups, even though even then the groups were still mixed with different people from different walks of life. I have a couple of friends who are as pal as I am, and they were part of the BKF, right? Just is what it is. But then you take like Savate. Savate grew out of, like France was not a safe place when Savate was developed, right? And the sailors, definitely did not live in a safe world, right? And there's a lot to Savate, and one of these days I'm gonna get you on to do an interview with me just to kind of walk through that, because it's a fascinating thing, because you have this Western art that often gets overlooked in the scheme of things that's like so complete when it comes to every aspect of self-defense and combat sport. You look at the West Javanese silat that we both like so much, right? And that was forged in a horrifying crucible, of wars and colonization and fights for freedom and all these different, things where the practicality of it had to exceed the stylization that was, but if you're an outsider looking in, what do you pick? Paul, if I was going to tell someone, how should I pick my instructor for self-defense? What would you say to them?
Well, number one, more likely they're going to go to the things depends on age. Okay. I'll put it this way. When I came back from France and we had the school in Dallas in the 90s, early 90s, right? A lot of the calls that I got were fathers that would call and say, I want you to teach my son or daughter how to fight. Okay, bring them in at this time. This kind of went out throughout the 90s. Right around 2000, you have the father calling and says, I'm working, my wife is going to take my son, but I want you to teach him how to fight. Okay. Around 2006, fathers were still calling, and they said, my son or daughter is getting bullied, left, bullied. My wife is going to take him to the class to see if he likes it. Okay. Now the fathers don't even call. Just the mom calls and says, how much is it? Okay. So they're not concerned whether the child is learning to be anti-bully or what have you, or learn how to fight. They're just going to the cheapest person. So that right there places something different. It's a type of where you're at, I guess. They're going to go to look at the place that's right next to a nail salon, right next to the grocery store. And usually it's going to be a place that's more commercial. And I get it. They have to pay for the rent. They have to pay for everything else. I get all that. I've been in the business for a long time. But the quality's not there. Maybe to them the quality is because they haven't, like you said, more out there, less watered down. Maybe that's as far as they got. But the age group that we've been getting, and I see this a lot in the silat realm, is you're getting people that are a little bit older. They've done the research. Here they want to learn how to fight. Hey, you know what? I want to learn how to fight. You're still getting that by the 25, 30-year-old, 40-year-olds that are coming into our schools. If they're younger, they're trying to get trained because their son or daughter or somebody's getting bullied okay? And that's what we're getting at. So if a person goes into your school, I let them watch a class. If they want to join, they can join. And I always tell people that are out there, look at the senior students in the class, because that's more likely the way you're going to end up as. They are your product. I could care less if I was teaching people how to be Jedi Knights. It ain't me. It's the product that you're pulling out, and that's where things are different, In Dallas, it was not by the serious martial artists. They would drive 2 hours one way just to train with an instructor. Here, we're down the block right next to us is a neighborhood. Some of the guys that are my students won't drive because it's too late, or it's, they got off work. And then all of a sudden now you have a person that's driving 45 minutes that lives in a little town next to us to come train with us. Understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So I hope I'm getting the question. The problem is, what you have to tell people is to look at who the instructor is, do the research on the style that you're doing, or whatever system they're going to be training in. Okay? Only because it says martial arts or karate out in the front does not mean that it's of any value. And some people get involved with arts and they find out that it wasn't what they're looking at. And a lot of these schools have a 2-year contract that's very hard to pull out of.
Yeah.
So they'll let their child be in there for a while and they'll end up with a black belt or what have you in a year. And all of a sudden, it's when's the real test. And it goes, I'm going to put it this way, and it goes back down with respect. Everybody has a level of respect. Do people respect you, respect me, or respect the school, and respect that? I've never lost the respect for my teachers because I got into a fight in the street or in the ring or what have you. Their name was still respected. Understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to produce a student that is going to go to the street and get his ass kicked by the first punk that raises his hand. Understand what I'm saying? Because the respect is going to say, Paul taught him how to fight. While other schools, people come to me after the fact and say, well, I was there for 5 years and went to a bar and got my ass kicked. Well,
it's funny is in my club, I drive people crazy with this stuff because I don't really have ranks, right? I just haven't been doing large open teaching, right? So I don't really have a need to structure the classes that way, right? Which I absolutely would if I had a large organization in terms of a public school. But I don't have ranks. But your first rank that you get, the first thing you achieve is you can now call yourself a student, right? If someone proves themselves, they're capable of doing this. Now you're a student. Now you can start learning. And I've had people they've come to some of my classes for a long time, but their mind was always somewhere else. They're always thinking, I'm creating my own thing here, and weren't really open to coaching. And then they'd go visit a friend of mine, and they want to drop my name, but the guy could tell by how he was failing at sparring that it wasn't my student, right? This was someone who may have attended the classes, but clearly wasn't doing the same thing as my guys do. And I think that's one of the most important things is your output, the quality of your students. I'm really happy right now. I have a string of really strong students spread across the country and overseas, but it took a while to kind of build that up and formulate that, right? So, and one of the challenges, and I'm curious, and maybe this might be a conversation for another day, is I know you've been very successful at this in a public setting, and as I'm getting older myself, I'm like, gosh, maybe I should open up a club, right? Just to have something better to do with my days, right? Actually, what I'll probably do is have to just come down and visit you for a while and watch how you do it, because it's very different in a public school versus a private school. So if I was going to pick a public school, looking at the student, you said that, right? Looking at the history of what's being taught, right? And that's good. It's very challenging in today's world because people are fed up a lot of hoo-ha on the internet these days. What else might you look at when I'm looking to
I would look at how long the school has been around. Okay. How long is I'll get referrals. If you're going into a new place, I'll ask people, hey, have you ever heard of this? Most people have heard of a school, of a person that teaches. It's like everything else. You grow up, you knew who the tough guys were, and if you walk into certain neighborhoods, you know who the tough guys are and who's not. Period. Okay. That happens in martial arts the same way, with that respect. It happens in boxing gyms, it happens in Silat, it happens in Savat, it happens everywhere else. So where do you want that respect that's there, that's looking at? If you talk to the community, what would you want me to train you? But more likely, if they train you, what do you want? Well, I got my little kid doing this, but I just want him just to do something. Well, they're not going to send them to my school or somebody else that's teaching boxing. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to happen. They're going to more likely going to refer them to go to a school that's in front of an elementary school that basically babysits a kid from 4 to 7 o'clock at night. And and so, but if they tell people, I really want to learn how to fight, more likely they're going to drop your name. Why don't you go train with Joe? Why don't you go train with Paul? Why don't you go train with, you know what I'm saying? So and that's so get referrals on how long the school's been around. Referrals are very good. Now, learn the associations that a person's in. Many people can say, well, there's a lot of made-up associations. Yes. Research them. Where are they from? How long have they been around? If you go into a school, how is the school set up? Does it have a lot of patina on the wall? What I mean by patina on the wall is there's a lot of pictures that half faded away and people look younger. And now you can tell that there is a connection that people have been around for a while, and then you have to look into. Because there's a lot of good guys that might be starting up a school, and let's say in this town they just opened up a place, and the person has a good background, and he's end up being a great teacher, but he just opened up. Okay, now if you go to a school and the person says, I've been here for 4 years, it has like 15, 20 black belts running around, something's odd.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I absolutely, grasp that. It's an interesting, there's an interesting topic here in that I think the most important thing you mentioned early on, which is look at the output. What do the students look like? And how consistent is that, I think. But it also depends on the student body. And one of the things that I've seen happen recently is the kind of people that used to be attracted, say, to the stuff that I teach, now often don't even consider it because they are convinced that the only answer is, MMA or whatnot, right? And that what we do gets grouped in with, the daycare center stuff, right? Which is interesting to me because I myself have never taught children, right? Other than when I taught at the Chinese school in Chicago, I did teach the kids class for a while. But they got me out of there as fast as possible because normally I was the free fight teacher. So not the best for the kids. It's how do you find the student? Because the student bodies have changed. I get people to come to my class and I'm becoming a physical therapist, not a martial arts instructor, right? I've got to fix their back and fix their leg and put their elbow back in before they can even start to do the most basic exercises. And then I got to figure out a yoga regimen so they can twist their body adequately enough without hurting themselves to do the technique. And sometimes it's young people I'm doing this with, not even the old beat up ones I get. That's how I develop these skills. Is I get the old Boilermakers that come to my class. They used to be able to fight and they want to be able to do it again, right? But now it's the young guys come in and they're crippled, right? And a lot of them, it's not like the 1 or 2 guys that need some extra care. It's like a whole bunch of them. And have you seen things like this?
Yes, of course. Savat's that way. Savat, I have an older crowd. Campo, it's kind of all over. We have women. And then Capoeira, it's kids and young guys and kind of all over. And then I have some that train every day and everything. Which is good. To me, a teacher of mine that taught me Kempo, his name was Keith C. He was from Hawaii. He was also first generation, both in Gajo Kempo and Parker Kempo. He was the one that was sent, little history on, to Dallas area to open up Kempo back in the late 60s. And he taught me one thing, which was cross-train. If you see something that's good, cross-train. Learn it, become proficient. And Okay. And I've always done that, and it wasn't that you were going to pick whatever you cross trained in and mash it into what you're already training in, right? That cross training is going to be more of a how can I say it? You might not do everything there. Maybe it's not for you, but at least you know how they move, how they fight, and so on and so forth to better yourself against them. See, that was a Gajo mentality. That's why they have all the different arts inside. It was for you to be able to fight in case somebody did something like that. You can fight against it, which is a great philosophy, right? To have. And what I'm getting at is here I make it open to everybody. If they want to train, go ahead and do it. The more, the better. Okay. But train each one in its own identity. Don't mishmash it.
Right.
You can do it.
Yeah, it's funny is I teach at people's requests, like you have this method, you have this method, right? But then my core class, we joke, we call it Kuntao, right? Because it's just I've been training for since 1979, right? Do the math. So everyone jokes we call it Joe Fu. I'm not trying to create an art or anything. It's just there's slivers of everything that infuse the set of fundamentals that we teach, right? And that becomes the baseline, right? And the inspiration for that just comes from I'm trying to stick to what I know works for me. That's why my promise is not that it's going to work for everybody. Just it works for me, and I can share with you what I know has worked for me. And then you can major in these, in these different things if you so choose, right? Yeah. And it was kind of an accidental, organic thing. I never had any intention of doing that. But if I look back in history, you look at like the Central Nanking Wushu Institute, right? This style of long fist that's widely taught now. That was actually the instructors there putting together some stuff that was the basic curriculum, so you could then go on and learn the other stuff. And it's not even that I'm really teaching anything unique or new or different. It's just the organization, the arrangement of it takes the training I received from Sanda training, right? How to organize things so you can teach people how to effectively fight. It takes an understanding of time, space, distance, and position from the Silat, right? And it's really heavily Silat based, but then it has the body mechanics and the structure of Bak Mei, right? Because that's what I did before, Bak Mei and Chuga. And it just is what it is. But it didn't happen. Because I studied a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I did judo for 5 years. I did Bak Mei for 6 years. I did Chuga for 10 years. I did Shuai Jiao for 15, 20 years, right? I did Silat for I don't know how long it's been now, 20 some years, right? And it's not a product of consciously trying to do these things. And I'm sure you've seen this yourself. Like your savant had to be influenced by your time with Pak Victor, right? And vice versa, right? There had been times you're looking at something from one art going, I'm not going to do it that way, right? Because of your other experience, right?
Yeah, but I'm glad that they showed me that they do it that way. And to answer what you're saying in that question, it's very simple. It's very simple, because what you're talking about is, in the world of martial arts, you have styles, systems, and methods. And what you're talking about is a method. This is my method of how I do things. My method.
Yeah.
Understand? And in the beginning, when I became a professor of Savant, my professor Viviani told me, you have to teach the whole system to be a professor. You have to teach everything. And I kind of looked at him. You can't teach people to be like you, because they're not. You have to teach everything there, and people are going to grasp it, and they're going to make themselves. And those that want to teach, those that want to be teachers have to still learn the whole system. And I said to myself, okay. And then that's where it was explained what styles were and everything else that comes of age. Style is like boxing. Boxing's a style. Okay, boxing has a jab, cross, uppercut, hook, and overhead. But everywhere in the world, they teach it differently. They teach you how to move differently. They teach you how to use your guard differently. They teach you how to advance differently. But you still have those different weapons, and those are stylistic changes that now you have here in the United States. You have the Philly shell and Mexican style, American style. Now you have the Russian style now, because they started developing those schools in those areas. That's how they started moving, And people say, well, did that happen in Savate? Yeah, it did. In Savate, for the longest time, both in Savate and boxe française, because they're both two different distinct disciplines running at the same time, up to 78. Then it merged, and they made a sport called Savate boxe française, which is what you see now. But during the 80s and 90s, when I lived there and you lived that life, depending on what club you went to, there were certain basic techniques that everybody learned. Then when you became the part of the crew, the nucleus of that that club, then you taught you some other things. And then you'll be like, how come you're teaching me this kick over here when we're all over here, but you're not teaching it openly?
Yeah.
And they used to call that regional kicks. So every club had a regional kick to that club, or a certain thing that club did. Why? In Paris alone, you had at that time frame when I was there in the 90s, you had 95 Savate clubs. Right now you have 30. Okay, so decimation has been pretty bad. But back then, you had so many people, you never knew who you were going to fight, whether in the ring or in the street. So you had to have, once you became part of that club's crew, the nucleus, then you train on this other things, right? Just in case you saw something in the street or you were in the ring, things were going to be changing a little bit different. And that type of mentality is very different. Understand what I'm saying? They weren't, even though they were all the same practitioners of the same style, everybody had something different.
Yeah, it's funny what you say there. It makes perfect sense, and life experience and observation proves it to be true. But in the martial arts world, particularly in America, I think people were fueled with stories of the original art, the perfect representation, and a lot of that is irresponsible or ignorant people teaching, right? Trying to prop themselves up in a way to say, oh, this is it. This is the supreme thing. Then also honest, good, legitimate teachers say, actually, that's not even close to correct. What are you guys talking about, right? And then everything in between, right? So there is a lack of understanding, and I can go back to the 1980s when I had a copy of the handbook from Master Wong's school from Sifa Manny. And I was reading it, and the curriculum ends, and it goes, now you have to go past this. You have to understand the way where everything you do builds off of this. You make it your own. And I was like, huh. To me, that was I didn't want to hear that, because there were so many people back then who were taking an hour of this and an hour of that and an hour of this and calling it their thing. And I was like, I am not going to ever innovate because I must find the original core thing and do this. And then you learn that, what you do is you learn these skills, and then you have natural attributes. You have things that you can do out of it. And that ends up becoming part of your focus. And other people have different attributes, right? And my dream with my club is, if I have students who really want to do something that I'm not the best at, I have students who are, right? They've made a study of this thing over there, maybe some kind of kicking or this or that. And I can send them over there, and they can get what they want, right? Or because I'm an open-minded guy, I'm like, hey, you're moving to Texas? Well, hey, I know this guy, Paul, and it may be completely different or something, but you're going to love this. Trust me, right? And that's how martial arts, I think, when I read history, even in other cultures like Wang Zhengzhai, the founder of Yichuan, or I think it was Wang Zhengzhai, very famous fighter. He traveled all over China fighting. Spoke highly only of a couple schools he came across, and his methodology was pretty sophisticated, considering the environment it came out of. And he was not interested in the stylistic or the school. Also, like, some of this is cultural nonsense passed over. Like in southern China, you had cults. Like some of the styles I studied came out of literal martial arts cults, right? So you're very insular. You're within your group, and you're part of this tong versus that tong. And then you had other cultures that are very Confucianist, like Japan or Korea, where they go, this is our school, da 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 da. But then you get to northern China, everyone's buddies, right? I started doing Shuai Jiao, and I'm like, hey, I can play with this Tongbei guy over here, and they don't mind. That's amazing, right? Because their whole idea was you got to, you absorb what you can and be able to fight with it, right? But that's a dangerous place, because absorb what you can doesn't mean take an hour of this, watch this video, and do that. You still have to put the time in. So I don't know if I made sense there, but
you did. Many might not grasp it, but I'll put it this way. Let's separate Parker Kempo from Gaju Kempo. Both great systems. Both guys, if you get some first, second, third generations, they're some tough guys that it's going to be hard to. The entanglement. Some of these guys are very hard and they're seasoned. Well, in the Gaju Kempo realm, you have methods. You have the Adriano Emperado method. You have the Gaylord method. You know what I'm saying? They call them methods because they changed it to whatever they like, a little bit different. And that's beautiful. You see the Lima Lama. Lima Lama is another great system that came out of, Grandmaster Tino Tilagosa was one of Ed Parker's first black belts. People don't understand. They don't understand the proximity of how everybody used to cross-train back then. You have people, including Uncle, talking about how they used to train with Ed Parker in the 60s. You know what I'm saying? Back and forth. That cross-pollination was very much so. That's why I think it was American Kempo Karate. They kind of took from everybody that was around there and developed it into what they were trying to achieve, which is great. But changing that a little bit towards, and you mentioned the Tong, which is probably one of the reasons why we have Chinese martial arts here, if it wasn't for them.
Yeah.
They brought a lot of their enforcers over here that knew how to fight. They had to get people to teach the other enforcers to learn how to fight. And people like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, you have that Kung Fu systems emerging from there. And basically that's the reason why they came in. I look at this. When you study the streets, besides law enforcement, the top of the food chain in the street are usually the enforcers of the mob.
Yeah, I mean that's the side of the history that most people don't talk about.
Those are the enforcers of the mob. And if you go into New York and all these areas, most of the systems that the enforcers did was what? Boxing, some type of kung fu that was taught out of the Chinatowns in there, whatever it was. I'm just going to put kung fu just to name it there. Yeah. If you go into France, guess what it was? Savate. If you went into you're in French Indonesia, more than likely was some type of Thai boxing or something equivalent to that, because that's what those enforcers did. So when you look at the enforcers, and people look at me and tell me, well, why are you talking about enforcers and all that? When you look at those bodyguards, the enforcers of the underworld, those are the guys that knew how to fight in the street. And those are the guys that knew what was good in the street. And of course, all the different edge weaponry that was around in those time frames that were still taught to those guys. And that's what people do not understand.
Yeah,
is the effectiveness of that.
look, there's a part of the history that we generally don't talk about in today, right? But my earliest teachers in Chinese martial arts were exactly that, right?
Mhm.
And and that was such a different world. And when I would hear people, oh, I went to this kung fu school and they couldn't fight, I'm like, what are you talking about? I've never seen a kung fu school where people couldn't fight, but I'd never been to a school that wasn't part of that world necessarily. I mean, I take that back. I have. There was a really high quality long fist school back in those days that didn't come from that. And then eventually, I met Dr. Wu, and he wasn't from that world at all. Um, but they all came from the Taiwan, the Taiwan incubator. All the people that fled mainland China, right? But
Right.
but when I meet more current martial artists, if I mention the names of my teachers, and if they know their community, they immediately look at me like, I got a bent nose because those were scary men, right? Where I was just a dopey white dude who got into it and was having a good time and was careful not to get swept up into anything, right? But like I have a student of mine who's now cross training with another club where he lives, and I encourage him to do so because they're as I told him, I said, look, the stuff that they're doing, I don't know if it's the same as what I was doing from that same style because it's a completely different club. And when I was learning, I didn't care about history. I didn't care about who taught who. All I cared about was, can I do this? And it just so happened I was learning from, the Tong members, right? And so I'm a very practical hand. And we're all good friends with that other club. But at first they were kind of like, oh, these guys might be,
Yeah.
might be bent. And I was like, no, 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 no. That's why I don't bring it up ever, right? It's yes, the method is good, and I could advertise, the art of the Chicago Chinatown, and I don't want to do that, right? I'm a civilized man, but as a result, the method is different, right? From a lot of stuff that you see. The guys who taught me knew how to fight, and
That's basically what it is. I mean, I was 6 years old. I got my ass kicked in the playground. My dad took me to my uncle and said, teach him how to fight. Later on, you start realizing that your uncle was very respected, throughout town, and your other uncles were as well. And then you start finding out one of the stories of one of them, and then you start realizing where and what they did. And one of them walked in the underworld, and okay. And then you start understanding what his presence was. And people do not understand that. These are people that they'll take 2, 3, 4 guys out without
thinking. Without blinking.
And
yeah, there's stories I can tell that I won't, but there's stories I could tell that were just like it was a different era.
And one time with my Professor Patorel, we were trained, and there was this guy that was very tough. He must have been, I don't know, I was 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old back then, 23 when I came back. And you're training with him every Monday and Thursday, and you're putting your gloves onto him, and he's training with you because he wants to learn. Back then I was, fighting and everything else. So you're not beating the crap out of each other, but he's training with you because he wants to feel a little bit more oomph than the other guys. So Mark and I would be sparring with each other. We had to do, 16 rounds every day before we left. And I remember one time we all went out in a club, and a fight broke out. One of the guys that was there got in a fight, and the fight broke out. And all of a sudden, we get a tap on the shoulder. They said, all you guys come with us. The police and security going to take everybody else out. And they put us in like a little section where that club was at. And the person that you're sparring with every day ends up being there, and ends up being one of the echelon of the underworld of Paris. And then you realize right then and there who this guy was. You know what I'm saying? And people are telling me, how do you know? But, he's my sparring partner at the school.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I think that was a very common back in the day in Chicago. There were certain clubs. It wasn't the club. The club I went to was first Steve Manny was like a firewall between me and the real crazy, right? But that club was all Chinese, right? But there were other clubs that Italians were involved in. And like I had a buddy who came out of one of those clubs, and he said the class was, you had the police there and you had the mob there working out of the same gym. They all knew each other.
Yeah, and my professor is one of the best policemen that France ever produced. Half the guys were police guys, and then you have this guy that's one of the underbosses of Paris at the time, working out there, and you're like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it lends to that story about how martial arts, you get all walks of life, right? I mean, it's true. I know all kinds of people would never know if I hadn't been involved in this, and includes some unusual characters but also some amazing characters, scientists and geniuses. Thank God doctors got a lot of free medical care through the years. Martial arts.
but that's what people don't understand is they say I hate when martial artists are out there and they say, "Oh, he's a black belt. That means that person only walks in this side of the street." Really? You know how many black belts and everybody else that are protectors of the underworld?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that you learn from walking and being aware of what's around you is that you develop in martial arts. Yes, you want to develop your fighting skill, but your mental skill, your sense of calm, your ability to de-escalate, your ability to be polite but establish a wall between yourself and others' activities is a skill that gets developed to a very high level. And even more so than the courage that comes from knowing martial arts. I think that's a skill that has benefited my life tremendously, because I can work in really intense corporate environments and nothing bothers me, right? It just doesn't, because I've dealt with crazier, right? I mean, I've actually had my life on the line, so this doesn't really bother me, right? This is just stuff. No one's gonna die. No one's gonna come back with bad feelings. And then you also realize that some people, they're in the different spots they are in life for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And a couple bad choices, the next thing you know, they're here or there. But there's always a lot of people I've seen over time, there's always hope for them to come around to a different path. And that's something else that I would never have, if you don't have the experience, you wouldn't see that, right? You wouldn't understand that. But it's opposite from the people who think that, there should never be any punishment for anything ever. I think that's ridiculous, right? But there's, even in the worst of people, a lot of times you find a lot of good. I've had some people who were very, how to put this, unkind people who showed me great generosity and loyalty, right? In terms of, because of the relationship from the
that's really correct. I think that the consistency, the loyalty, the fellowship, those are things that one must look at when they're training. You want to get better? Consistency. Things that you're going to develop, the fellowship within the school. You want to look at that. And to answer the first question, going back of what to look for in the school, look at how everybody's acting. If everybody's amicable to each other is one thing. How does the instructor come up to you and greet you? If he comes up to you and say, "I'm Grand Master, blah, 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 blah," you're like, or if he comes up there and says, "Oh, I'm Mr. Buitron, how you doing? I'm Paul Buitron," and
yeah,
what?
Well, it's funny is I have a couple students. They moved up north, and there's actually a huge salon school up north. It's like one of the biggest salon schools in the USA, and they do the sports salon stuff there, right? And they're really cool people apparently. So they invited me to come up to see this tournament they were having, and all kinds of clubs from the tri-state area here came out there, and they heard stories about our method and our club and this and that. And so I could tell the guy was a little nervous, right? Because we're a reputation for students that are very, very competent. My students who joined that club were one of them instantly became one of their best fighters, right? And after I was walking around talking to people, they're like, "Man, you're like a really chill dude. You're like," because I don't have. I mean, those martial arts people have ears they put on, right? And this and I got this and I was like, "Hey, man, I'm Joe. How you doing?" I mean, it's the person and they're a person. They're like, "We get along. This is great. Let's talk. Show me what you're doing here. Let's see what this is, right?" And I think that if all you've ever been experienced to are like big Confucian inspired culture, martial arts, where everyone is standing on a pedestal. Standing on a pedestal is just a way to get people to throw tomatoes at you, right? I mean, you can be the greatest coach in the world, but there's no reason you have to be a jerk or put yourself above other people. And I'm not saying I'm anywhere near the greatest coach in the world, but I have decent students. I train hard. We have good fun. But why be a jerk, right? I mean, that's one of the things that really impressed me when I first met you, is you have this great reputation, right, with Savat and all this other stuff. And was watching you teach, because I was in the bar drinking with Guru Plink and Pak Vic and a few others, and I saw you teaching, so I stayed there for a minute, right, and I was watching, and I was like, wow, this guy is fantastic, right? But never once were you weren't parading around, bowing so much your brain was getting addled, right? You were just coaching, and the quality was visible in what you saw, right? And I think as martial arts teachers, it's something we should all emulate, all work towards, right? Because yes, the art should be respected. Yes, the teacher should be respected, right? He's giving you something that you basically owe the life. You owe your life if you're a good teacher. But there's also no need for the crazy pomp and circumstance, right?
Yep.
And I look at that in the self-defense teachers. The teacher's very big on, ritualistic structures, like really big on it. It's not just something that's a tool for managing a class, but he's like really into it. I'm like, run away. Just run away. Because all the guys know they can fight, they have a smile on their face, they're happy to meet you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and that brings down to, I guess, the last point that I'll come in. If you go in there and they want to help you find some type of spirit world in a school, turn around and walk out.
I have a way to do this, right? Is pick a fight with us and you will visit the spirit world. It's really touch me and visit the spirit world. That should be a t-shirt we could do.
And you go into some of these schools and you're like, but you're correct. Those type of instructors, most of them can't fight. There's some good out there. There's some good guys that have found that became born again, or out there they're preaching, and that overflows into that. That's good for them. But in all essence, try to shy away from all these guys that are.
Yeah,
there's some snake oil salesmen around.
Exactly. The quality should be demonstrable, on the mat, right? And like, I have a friend of mine. He makes us all look like young guys, right? He's one of the pioneers of Muay Thai in this country. His gym produces great fighters. Ajarn Rick Solo out of Chicago. The guy's he's just a great guy, brilliant coach. I chat with him all the time, and he is at an age where he just coaches. He doesn't really do anymore, right? And his students are top notch. You look at his students, you go, wow, this guy is phenomenal, right? Yeah. And because of the output of the students. And I think that right there is probably, I think, the most important thing people will walk away with today is that observation, which is look at the result.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at that product. The product is a student. If you want to join the school, the product that's coming out of the school is a student, not the instructor. He's already walked his life, and it's a student that's there, and understand that. Don't jump into a martial arts school because of a name. Research. You might have a great instructor that's teaching Taekwondo here that's just an excellent instructor, or you might have a person that's teaching whatever art that's in there, but the name's not going to save you. It's what you get out of the school that's going to protect you. And really research it. That's what I tell people. You want to do Savate, come in here and do Savate. Savate's a hard art. Capoeira's even worse. You want to sweat every day and go home aching all over, do Capoeira.
Yeah, I have a friend, Guru Sam Clark out of Chicago. He was a student of Eddie Joffrey's and some other Salat folks, but and some Haramao teacher who it was, but he blended what he did because he realized in Chicago, you got ice, you got snow, you got broken glass and bottles. Like you can't really do most of the Haramao kudas in that environment. And so, and then he was having, he would spar other people. He ran into these challenges, and he blended capoeira with his silat. And I have to tell you, it is like amazing what he does. It's really cool stuff. Well, I'll have to introduce you guys because he's a character, right? It'd be a fun conversation. But
yeah, and we go to Brazil and people say, "Oh, capoeira's not effective." Really?
I got a shot of my ribs here from Guru Sam that tells me it is. So,
and you look at him, really? Oh, he's not a good friend of me. Every single capoeira guy that I know is doing MMA over there and winning.
One of I ever had sparring is there was in Chicago. I was looking for a place to teach out of. This guy I knew was taking me around. Guy I met actually wanted me to start teaching. This was years ago. And one of the places it took me to was in the middle of one of the worst hoods, and it was a capoeira Angola school, right? Then I sparred with the teachers, and I was trying not to laugh the whole time because I was laughing so hard because I thought I was probably going to die, right? These guys had serious skill, and I mean we had a great time. We were friendly. We gave each other a couple, bruises and bloody spots, but it was all in fun. But these guys were cold stone serious, right? And unless you've actually fought one of these guys who's trained you for fighting, I'm telling the people out there listening to this is don't be overconfident by the stuff you see on the internet because it's very amazing in terms of its unpredictability. So
absolutely. Brother, it was a great conversation. I hope everybody out there can pick something out of what we talked about. We talked about the life of martial artists and also teaching and what we've been looking for most from our eyes and what we should see and what a martial art school should be. A lot of people want to go into the martial arts, want to train, they want to learn how to fight, and they go to a martial arts school literally to learn how to fight, to defend themselves. So that is the end game. And unfortunately, because of that, there's other attributes that it builds, but you have to have the skills when you come out of there of whatever they're saying is their formed student, from beginner to being formed. And, so you look at that. Look at the respect that the community has about that. Look at everything. And brother, we will continue this. And we should do it once again, and but talk about maybe another topic like you were saying. Look at some other ends because we touch base on a lot of stuff here, from the underworld to effectiveness to
spirit world,
teeth, everything. The spirit world as well. All righty, we'll see you soon. And folks out there, you guys stay safe, be safe, and God bless you all, brother.
Thank you, sir. Peace out.
Bye. Have you ever wondered about what happens in a martial arts studio? Well, you start right away by setting goals, building determination, gaining focus, building skills, all while becoming more fit, gaining confidence, and learning self-defense. Buitron Academy is a school where attitude meets aptitude. So give us a call at 956-401-4868.